This is the Alternative Leader Podcast with Mary Williams, inspiring the leaders of today, getting to the grit and discovering the gold with powerful insights and learnings, helping us to lead with strength, determination, and compassion.
Welcome to the Alternative Leader podcast. This is a really exciting day because it's my very first guest ever, and I'm really delighted to introduce to you and have as my first guest Neil Fachie, who is 14-time world champion cyclist and Paralympic champion of London 2012. And he's also now #1 best-selling author of the book Earn Your Stripes. So we're going to talk to Neil today about his view of the challenge of resilience that he's gained and gone through in his career, and all of the tips that he has for you and for the world leaders that we're here for. So thank you very much, Neil, for joining me. I'm really touched that you've been my first guest.
Yeah, my pleasure. What an honour to be the first as well.
Thank you very much. So I'd like you to start by talking to our listeners about why and how you got into the Paralympics. And obviously that for you starts way back, looking at the issues you've got around your sight. So can I ask you to sort of explain that?
Yeah, by all means. So I have a hereditary eye condition, and I was diagnosed at the age of 4, which is a day I remember quite vividly. It was Christmas Day, actually. So it's one of my first memories was we got together as a wider family, and we were all going out to play, myself and my cousins. It was just coming down dark outside. So being competitive as I was even at that age, I had to be first out. So I ran as fast as I could out into the back garden and ran straight into a washing line pole in my grand's back garden. And obviously that was quite upsetting and shocking. And I was taken back to my mum, who gave me a big hug and made sure everything was all right. And she turned to my dad and she said, do you think he's got it? And he said, yeah, I think he's got it. And at that age, I've just got this vivid memory of being terrified of what is it? What's wrong with me? But unfortunately later that week, I was diagnosed with my eye condition, retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, which is quite a common eye condition actually. Mm-hmm. And it degenerates over time. So at that point, my eyesight was pretty good, to be honest. It was just poor in low level lighting. But over time, it's got gradually worse and worse. So it didn't really affect me in my early school life, but I had to kind of adapt as I got a bit older to kind of sit closer to the blackboards and whiteboards, and then getting larger text and gradually finding more and more solutions to cope with it. Mm-hmm. But sport's always been something that I took part in, and it was never disability sport. I came from a generation, I think, that was more hide your disability. So I never really let anyone know about it, to be honest. So I just competed able-bodied sport for many years in athletics actually, and never was the Paralympics really a thing on my radar at all. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that my eyesight had got to a point where more people were aware, and someone had suggested to me that the Paralympics could be a viable option. And I always assumed my eyesight was too good, but I went to get my eyes tested, and sure enough, they'd always been bad enough. It's just what I'd grown up with, and so I'd learned to live and thought this was normal, really, my eyesight level. But yeah, suddenly Paralympic sport was an option, and almost since that point, I've been a full-time athlete, bar a couple of years at university, in a variety of sports as well now, which we might get onto later as well.
It's interesting how you talk about growing up, not knowing any difference. And, one of my sons was born with a congenital cataract, so he's almost blind in one eye and doesn't have 3D vision. And it is interesting, isn't it? Because you grow up being you don't recognise that there should be anything different. And so when you said at school about how you didn't, it was about hiding your disability, did you feel that you got a backlash about it at all, or was it just something people just didn't know about?
The biggest issue I had, I think, was more I suffered myself for hiding it. So, as I said, the biggest issue when I was younger was seeing in low level light, and living in Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland during winter. I mean, there's barely daylight, sadly. So you get out of school and it was already coming down dark. So I just get home as quick as I could, and I wouldn't put myself in those situations with being with friends and when it was dark, because then they would know. So often I was just getting asked, do you want to come out? Do you want to hang out with us? And I just say, no, I'm busy. I've got athletics training or whatever. And I always had an excuse. And, people only ask so many times, obviously. And so gradually, I guess my social circle got smaller and smaller as a result. And people didn't see me as being someone with a disability. They just saw me as being someone unsociable, which is obviously far worse. So, so I think I really punished myself a lot. And, I didn't learn my lesson quick enough, sadly. But, I'm fortunate as I've got older and you get smarter and wiser that I've realized that having something unique and different about you is actually quite empowering. So, I quite like the fact I've got a disability in many ways. It helps me stand out from the crowd and has helped me with problem solving over the years. So I feel like that's a real strength of mine, because you're constantly evolving how you deal with different situations when you have to tackle it from a different angle.
So your closest friends didn't know when you were growing up?
No, I think probably my best friend had an idea. And the reason being, as I got a bit older, I had to get a taxi home in winter because it was just too dark. And I never used anything like a white cane, which, I say I couldn't get home. I certainly could have done if I'd actually tried, but I had to get a taxi. So he was kind of aware from that point of view, but I never arranged the taxi to come until quite a bit after school, just so no one else was aware. So I just kind of hop in when everyone else had already gone. But my closest friend knew, but that was about it, really. So I'm quite sad looking back at the fact I felt I needed to hide it. That seems unfortunate, and I hope that's changed for younger people now.
I was going to say, if we had parents watching, so I know a good friend of mine whose son has, and I'm actually wondering if it's exactly the same condition. He's now coming up for 10, I think. If you had advice to the parents about how to talk to their children about it or how to go about it, what advice would you have?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is obviously when you're at school, you want to fit in and be like everyone else. And it's funny that the day you leave school, suddenly you want to be the person that stands out from the crowd, and it almost completely flips on its head. Yeah. But, you all want to fit in. So having that chat of saying, oh, you could use a white cane and do these things and you'd manage far better. And of course they would, but you don't want to be the child with a white cane, because school can be cruel sometimes. But I think it's just reinforcing the fact that having something unique about you is actually interesting and special. And I think when you're out and about with your children in those situations, not necessarily at school, but encouraging the use of things like white canes, which they're always going to be a bit reluctant at first, but once you actually start using it and realize you don't get people looking at you funny, you don't get those reactions, then I think you start to become more comfortable with it anyway. So, I just say certainly don't wrap your children up in cotton wool. I think that's always a mistake as well with some parents of disabled children, is encourage them to get out there, experience life, and sometimes fail and make mistakes and learn, because that's the only way we do improve. Interestingly, my wife is totally blind, and she was blind from the age of 5 from a family of visually impaired people too. And from a young age, they encouraged her to do things like go to the end of the road and post something in the post box when she was 6 or 7 years old and had no sight at all. So it was that kind of forcing them to go out in the real world and experience it, which sounds tough, but you know what? It certainly sets you up for later in life.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. Okay, and so you said that you're always into sport. So tell me your sporting journey, how it kind of developed from athletics up to what you do now.
Yeah, so initially it was athletics, because the simplicity of just running and that freedom was something I just fell in love with instantly. Just go as quick as you can. And, it was just great. As I said, school started to become a stressful environment as my social circle got smaller. Whereas this release of athletics was great for me, and my social circle within athletics was booming, to be honest. So it was a great release for me, that. So I fell in love with sport, and I've always been competitive, and, I wasn't particularly good at it, to be honest, when I was younger. There were many years when I lost almost every race I did, but I loved being able to challenge myself to improve. And, fortunately over time, I gradually got better as well. And as I said, I got involved in Paralympic sport in my early 20s and got onto the development squad with UK Athletics, which ultimately led to competing in my first World Champs, where I finished 6th and 7th in the the 200 meters and the 100 meters respectively.
Mm-hmm.
And then later went on to the games in Beijing in 2008, Paralympic Games. And that was just this incredible moment for me. I only just made the team. I was probably the last man to qualify. It was kind of skin of my teeth stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I had no idea just how huge the Paralympics were until I arrived in Beijing and I walked into the athletes' village and just was instantly overawed by it. It was this, I mean, the athletes' village is where the athletes and the staff and everyone stays at the games. And it's, you know, you've got people from almost every nation on earth.
Mm.
And at the Paralympics, all with different disabilities. And it's just this hugely diverse place. It's absolutely incredible. There's nothing like it on earth. There's nowhere that could be as diverse. It's just amazing. And I just, I fell in love with it. Just the spirit, the whole positivity around it. You've got people with disabilities, but these aren't people feeling sorry for themselves by any means. You know, it's people who are out there achieving and tackling disabilities in different ways. And it's so inspiring that, yeah, I just fell in love with it. So the event itself, I finished 9th in both my events, 1 and 200 meters, which top 8 making the final meant I just missed out, which was a disappointment. But, you know, the games were what I'd fallen in love with, and I knew this is what I wanted. And in 4 years' time, it was going to be the London Paralympic Games. And I thought, well, you know, there's very few people get to experience a home games, Olympics or Paralympics, in their lifetime. So this was an opportunity I couldn't miss. So I decided, you know, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna do whatever I can to make sure I improve and make it to London. But 2 weeks after I got back, I got a phone call from my manager at UK Athletics, and they said straight up, we don't think you've got the potential to make it to London, and your contract is terminated with immediate effect.
Oh God.
And in that instant, that was it. You know, dream was done, and there was no way back as far as I could tell. And I'd love to say that I'd bounced back straight away, but, you know, obviously I felt sorry for myself and I blamed everyone else. I was angry about it, and, you know, I think kind of almost going through that grief stages, you know, that I had to kind of process it and deal with it. And I entered a bit of a depression as well, where I just sort of shut off. I was applying for jobs because you know, my parents were pushing me and I needed to go out and do something, but I couldn't get a job. I was signing on at the job centre, and I was just spending most of my time playing computer games and shutting off from the outside world entirely. But fortunately, that spark of London was still there. And one morning I just woke up and I thought, you know what, you're going to absolutely kick yourself if you don't give it one last try. Sitting and watching it on TV is just going to be too much to bear. So I decided to, in that moment, just to research every sport for visually impaired athletes at the London Games. And I decided I was essentially going to try every single one until I found one I was good enough at that I might just make it. And it was a long shot, but I thought, why not? You know, I was kind of at my lowest ebb anyway, so there was nothing to lose. And by chance, cycling was the sport I was going to try first, because I've always been a fan. And Team GB had just had an incredible Olympic Games in Beijing where they won almost everything on the cycling track as well. So, you know, it was very much in the public eye at that point. Yeah. So I called up Manchester Velodrome and said, you know, how do I get on and have a go? And they said, oh, there are these things called taster sessions where anyone can come along from the public and give it a try. And I said, yeah, all right, I'll give it a go. And I got off the phone and realized I hadn't told them that I couldn't see very well. I thought, should I let them know? And I thought, they might not let me have a go. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to go. And I travelled down from northeast Scotland to Manchester, and I got on the track on a bike on my own, a solo bike, and I wobbled my way around and kept well away from everyone else. You know, I was safety conscious. And I didn't crash, thankfully, and I got round, but that was kind of it. And I was about to leave. I was walking out the venue, and it just happened to be a Great Britain cycling team session on afterwards. And there was a guy warming up, and he saw my bag, which said Beijing 2008 on it, because I was still living my former glories and carrying it around, you know. And he said, oh yeah, I'm a former Olympian. I've moved to the Paralympic squad. I'm what's known as a pilot. I ride on the front of a tandem, and what I need is a visually impaired rider to go on the back of the bike. Do you know anyone? And I thought,
gosh.
Yeah, I might know a guy. So just this incredible moment of being in the right place at the right time, which then led to, trial days and opportunities, and ultimately joining British Cycling in 2009. So, it was an incredible shift, and it was quite out of character for me to do something like that, get on the phone and take charge and actually go and commit to something. So, just that spark that day seemed to trigger it, and as they say, the rest is history.
Yeah. So I was going to say, so what? I mean, because I think that's really common, isn't it, for when people lose that kind of goal, for them to just kind of give up and go into a depression. And as you said, you're right. It's grief, isn't it? It's grief of a kind. So what, when you look back, can you think what triggered you to kind of wake up that morning and just go, do you know what? I'm not done here. Actually, I want to do this, and I'm going to go out there. And I'm going to try every sport out there. Can you remember? Was there something that changed?
Yeah, I've often tried to think back, because it's a story I now tell a lot. And at the time, there wasn't a definite trigger that I can think of, other than the fact that it had just been the Beijing Games had been such a moment that I'd fallen in love with, and this target of London 2012 was something that was so strong at the time. If you find that something that not just motivates you, because I find motivation comes and goes, it ebbs and flows like anything, but having that kind of real big focus or a reason why you're doing things, and I think that just ticked the box for me. So although I was struggling, it just something came out one day, and maybe it was something I saw on TV, I'm not sure, but it just triggered, and I woke up and actually, from a point of feeling really numb, not feeling upset about it, and just going through the motions, to suddenly just this excitement that filled me, and I thought, I just got to make the most of this now, and take it while you can. I think I was lucky, and there will have been a trigger there, but I can't pinpoint what it was. But it is just trying to find that one thing that means something to you.
Has that moment helped you when you've had disappointment since then? Have you been able to almost kind of, because you recognise I was able to go from this state to this state, have you been able to kind of almost, even if you didn't know what it was, have you been able to trigger it again?
Yeah, I think so. I've certainly accepted that. I now accept failure, for one thing, that losing and failing I don't always see as a negative. It's not to say every failure has been something I've dealt with well and instantly. And there have been a few occasions in my career where I've been at a low point, but I've always found that after every low point, something incredible has happened positively afterwards. So I now always just look at it. I try and, first of all, speak to other people, because I was at that point in my life so internalized with everything that I wasn't sharing and getting any perspective from anyone else. Whereas now I try and share those moments to get that perspective, a bit of a fresh look on it, and look at things from a step back almost. And when you see the big picture, rarely is it quite as bad as you think it is. And there's usually, an element of light somewhere. I mean, as a nation, we've had a particularly tough year, and lots of things have gone wrong, but I hope that, again, we can see a kind of a positive that we can take away from every situation. And that's now how I try and look at it, I think.
Okay. If I had other people thinking of joining the Paralympics but feeling worried about their disability or whatever, what would your advice be to them?
I mean, to be honest, my advice as someone who had a disability and who got involved in sport was that it wasn't the competitive side of sport necessarily that interested me initially. It was the social side, and the sort of skills that it helped me build, the confidence it gave me was huge. So first of all, I don't think it's just for those who are talented and who might consider the Paralympics, but sport within disability is such a great, it's great for mental health, and it's obviously great for physical well-being as well, which for many people with disabilities could have other underlying health issues. It's so important. So I'm very much an advocate of just getting out there and having fun, widening your circle, and you take it from there, really. So you don't necessarily even need to be involved with specific disability groups, although they are out there as well. If you want like-minded people, if you're feeling a bit uncomfortable about going out there with the wider public. But I just joined a regular athletics club, and there are many others who have done it with cycling as well. And there's lots of people who are willing to help, quite frankly. And it's a world now that the Paralympic sport is so much more well known, I think, in the UK, that there are so many clubs, there's so many teams. I definitely just recommend get out there and have some fun.
And you mentioned earlier at the beginning, you mentioned about sort of almost feeling glad that you've got your disability now. So, and I know a lot of people I often see them as they're transitioning from being, let's say, for want of a better word, okay, to having a disability, and life being a new normal, the sort of phrase that we've heard a lot recently. Tell me, how do you gain that mindset? Do you know what I mean? That I love my disability so much, kind of, I wouldn't give it up. I mean, I've heard that before, and I just wondered what your take on it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very different from those who are born with a disability to those who acquire it. And I think it would have been a lot harder had I been in my teenage years, for instance, and then suddenly I'd found out I had a problem. So I guess I'm fortunate I did get to grow up with it and deal with it over time. But again, it's that just taking a look back and reflecting. So when I look back at my kind of teenage years, there were an awful lot of people from school who ended up, I said I wasn't out socializing in an evening, who ended up going down that route and getting into the wrong groups and not doing well, particularly well at school, and not really amounting to a whole lot, which is sad to say, but I feel like I almost dodged a bullet by not being involved sometimes with those groups. But the key thing, I think, was the problem-solving ability, which is something most people with a disability have without realizing it. Is you're constantly tackling a world that isn't built for you by any means, and it's having sight loss has its challenges for sure within everyday life, but there's almost nothing you can't do. You just have to approach it in different ways. And because my condition has got worse over time, it has allowed me to constantly have to develop. As my sight gets worse, I need to try new technology. And I used to read books fine. Now I can't read anything print, so I either have to use some form of technology to read that, or I have to use computers. And you just adapt over time, I think. But when you do acquire a disability, and we see this a lot in Paralympic sport, there's that whole period of acceptance, which is hard for sure. But just being able to reflect on what you do have and what your new skills might be as well is incredible. And being involved in the Paralympic movement definitely helps, as you see that wider world of disability and what others are going through and what they're still achieving. It's hard not to be inspired. It sounds kind of cliche, but it's just ridiculous. You never can feel too bad about your own situation when you see what others are doing, and they've always got a smile on their face.
I was going to ask you that when you were in that village surrounded by so much diversity, did it change the way that you viewed your own disability?
Definitely, and also the way I viewed Paralympic sport, because it wasn't hugely publicized at that point, and I guess you almost had that image of it's a games for the poor disabled people, at least it's almost like a day out for them, But then you get there and you're like, whoa, this is serious, and I'm getting my head kicked in by people who are way quicker than me and way more talented. And you just look around and realize these are absolute physical specimens who are at the absolute pinnacle. And, it's all these incredibly intelligent people. Most of them have been to university and they're all achieving huge things. And they're not even all full-time athletes, because generally the funding isn't great globally for para sport. So a lot of them are successful business people. They're successful in whatever industry they do as well. And it's just, you suddenly have this eye-opening moment of, wow, everything's possible. And I'm seeing people with no sight at all who are maneuvering around perfectly fine, and I'm struggling in the dark because I'm too proud to use a white cane. It's kind of that kick up the rear end you need sometimes,
Interesting. I have a similar thing in that, obviously, through the clients I see, it always brings home to me how very lucky I am in my life. And so I find whenever I'm going through challenges, yes, I can grieve and they can be as stressful, but I think not as stressful as for other people, because I'm always so aware of how lucky I am. And it sounds like that's a sort of similar outlook to what you've gained through the Paralympics.
Yeah, definitely. And by no means am I saying you should go and surround yourself with people who are having terrible lives, just so you feel good about yourself. But it is amazing when you get, again, that perspective on things, it just helps you look at things from a different angle, I think. So I do count myself incredibly lucky.
Yes. And I think, just reference to the times that we've gone through this year in the middle of this sort of pandemic, if people are watching this kind of years down the road. But I saw a lovely quote by Terry Waite, the hostage, You just said people, you're being asked to, be in your house with your, with your family, and you have, roof over your head and your TV and food. This is not a problem. And I think it's been very interesting to see this kind of split of people who've been able to go, okay, this is not great, but this is okay. And people who've sort of just crashed and burned with it, really. And I certainly know on my, down days with it, I've been able to think, but I'm not displaced in India. I've not just lost my job and my children. And I think that perspective is something, I certainly try to pass that on to my clients. It's not, as you say, it's not devaluing what's going on for anybody, but it's saying, just be aware that there are people with challenges out there also struggling worse than you, and have some value of what you do have. And I love that you're saying, I look at what I have rather than what I don't have. And I think that's a beautiful way to look. But talking about business, you've brought out a book. So tell me more about the book.
Yeah, so this really came about after the Rio Games in 2016, where I went in as a huge, overwhelming favourite to win gold. I'd gone undefeated for 4 years in cycling at that point. So, I felt like, my team certainly expected me to win. And, I saw the build up to the games where I was mentioned on Channel 4 at the time as being a serious gold medal favourite as well. So you're suddenly aware of this nation of expectation on you. Yeah. And sadly for me that day, I performed well, but another bike performed better, and we came away with a silver medal. And a silver medal should be an immense achievement at Paralympics, but for me at the time it was this complete and utter failure. And I felt like I'd let down my team, my family, and my nation, to be honest. And it, I spoke about how I'd learned how to bounce back from things, but that one was a tough one to get back from. So I started to, I actually lost my world titles a few months later as well. And I started to wonder if this was the beginning of the end of my sporting career, a sort of downward spiral in performance that I guess just hits the older you get in sport. It's not a long lifespan by any means. So I kind of realized that I didn't have any future after sport. I had no other source of income, and I needed to start thinking about what the future might look like. And again, we've used this word reflection a lot, but it gave me the opportunity to reflect a bit. And initially I thought, what have you got to offer the world? You've just been doing sport for the past decade. There's nothing else for you out there. But again, chatting to people and just looking back myself, I started to realize that actually I've learned a lot of skills over the years. I've learned how to become the best in the world at something. I've learned how to stay there for a number of years, and how to deal under extreme pressure. For instance, competing at London in a home games in front of a home crowd as a medal favourite. I mean, that was immense pressure, but I found a way to deal with it, and not everyone does, So I started to realize that actually, I've learned a lot of skills. I've got something to offer the world, and I kind of was trying to work out how I could use that to benefit. And I thought I could offer it to the sporting world, but I realized that these lessons actually applied to a great deal of things. And particularly I find that there are a lot of crossovers between the worlds of sport and business, where, it's highly competitive, ever evolving world where, if you're not keeping up with the latest trends, whether that be in training or whether that be in products, whatever it might be, you're just going to fall behind. So, I started to realize that maybe I could offer something to business as well. And I just got speaking to a few people within a business environment and realized that actually these were things that they were perhaps lacking in and could really utilize. And I guess the book was really born out of that. When I started to realize I had something to offer the world and I wanted to share my message, then, I just started putting pen to paper, and it turned out to be a much longer process than I anticipated. And I'm certainly no natural writer, so it took me a bit longer, but I spent a lot of time on it because I wanted it to be a message that people bought into. And delighted to say it's now been released, and I think it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, it's not been out for very long, but what kind of impact it does have on people in a business environment. So far, the feedback's been great, and I'm confident that I can offer something to those businesses that really want to take that next step forward and achieve world-class performance at the end of the day.
And so tell us a little bit more about what the book's about. So if you've got businesses watching now, what's the message to them? What are you helping them solve?
Yeah, well, obviously it's using the insights and lessons learned from my sporting career, and I've kind of come up with this this 5-stripe system, and it comes up. It's called a stripe system because in cycling, when you become a world champion, you earn, along with your gold medal, you get a jersey which has 5 bands, colored bands on it, 5 stripes. It's known as the rainbow stripes.
Right.
And so a saying I used over the years to kind of motivate myself was "earn your stripes," which is what I titled the book. So when I was in training and finding it going a bit tough or whatever, you know, those days when you just didn't fancy it, if I told myself, "Come on, Neil, earn your stripes," then it just flicked my brain back and always got me, you know, focused on the task in hand. So that's where it came about. And I developed this 5-step system, which I decided to call a stripe system. So the 5 key areas I think you need in order to perform at world-class level are, first of all, drive, which we've spoken about already, of having that motivation, you know, that deep-seated desire to perform. Then you look at the kind of the how you go about it, the performance aspect. So for me, that would have been my day-to-day training, how I get the most out of myself. But it's just how you perform day in, day out to ensure that you're getting towards whatever your desired outcome is. The team is the next one, which again, in sport, you often just see those individuals on the podium and don't realize the huge team of support behind. And within British cycling, we've got just this huge team of specialists, people who are, you know, leading the way in their very specific niche. So we've got coaches, physios, psychologists, nutritionists, you know, it goes on and on, this huge list of people who are offering support so that the athletes get the most out of themselves. And then it's about mindset. So, you know, you've got all the tools in place, but as I said before, your motivation comes and goes, but how do you ensure you're there every day performing at your best? Athletes aren't necessarily these hugely mentally tough people that we all envisage they are. They're actually, most of them are more on the unstable end of the scale, I'd say. You know, I've seen some who really, I can't understand how they ever make it to a start line sometimes, but they find a way somehow, you know. It's these tools that they've got in place that I guess we've just learned over the years that help you. So when you get up on those mornings and you think, I just don't fancy it today, but you still go in and perform at an absolute world-class level despite that. And then finally, as I alluded to earlier, performing at the highest level of pressure. And, you know, to be a world leader in whatever you do, there are going to be those days that really matter. You know, you need to perform. And it's about finding a way that you don't just perform to how you normally do, but actually using that situation to get even more out of yourself. So in a sporting context, it's no surprise that usually world records are broken at either Olympic or Paralympic Games or World Championships when the pressure is at its highest. And that's those athletes using that pressure to get even more out of themselves.
Yes.
And that's the system that, I think you tick those 5 boxes and you're doing pretty well.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. And it's a #1 bestseller already.
Yeah, it is. You know, I was overwhelmed by the interest, and you know, obviously a lot of people who are interested in the sporting stories, and there are plenty of those. It's quite an autobiographical book, but equally those who are interested in improving and taking that step forward. So I think there's something in there for everyone, really. If you're someone who likes reading sad stories, well, there's a few down points as well, but the fact that I wrote a book about it, I think so. I'm proud. Thank you.
That's lovely. So I'm going to ask you this sort of question. When it was your sort of challenging times, was there a book, a film, or piece of music that helped you at the time?
Yeah, there's been a few. I'm going to be really greedy and pick one of each, actually.
Absolutely.
And I'll be brief about it, but yeah, why not? I've got my opportunity. So in terms of music, there's a song by an American band, not that well known, I don't think, called Sleeping with Sirens. And it's just the lyrics of the song called Legend. And they're talking about how when you're young, how you see the world and your future. And the lyrics go something along the lines of, let me think, I need to get right. If I misquote them, that'd be terrible. It says, we could be young, we could be free, we could be anything in life we want to be. We can move mountains, we can stand tall, we can stand strong enough to fight and never fall. We can be legends after all. And just that reminder of when you're a child and you see the world as this big, bright, exciting place, but then we seem to get that drilled out of us. And those lyrics always, when I hear them, just make me think, you can do anything you want. Of course you can. So that's something that always gets me.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be a rock fan to like it as well. So it's maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but you could turn it into a poem, I'm sure. In terms of books, then for me, it was Entrepreneur Revolution by Daniel Priestley, who
Right.
I know you're a fan of as well.
Mm.
And it was just the first time I'd read a book about business and entrepreneurship, and I thought, oh, actually, this is what, I was talking about reflecting and this, my own book coming out. It was one of those moments when it made me think I do have something to offer. I always saw the world of business as maybe not being for me because I'd not been involved in it. And I felt like you had to have some form of experience to get going. But it just inspired me to think, well, actually, yeah, you could do something. And it just got me excited, a bit like when I woke up and that morning and researched all those different sports. I got so excited by this book. It just made me think, oh, this could be a world for me.
Yeah.
And then finally, there was a movie, it's a docu-film actually, called The Crash Reel, which followed the progress of a snowboarder from the US who was training for the Winter Olympics. And he was on track to make it to the games and be a medal contender. And in training one day, while performing a trick, he had a horrible accident where he had a serious head injury. And just this flip of a switch, he went from, just young guy loving life to suddenly someone who almost died and never got back. The head injury meant that his physical body could never work in the way that it once did. And it just followed the progress of his recovery and how he kind of then got on with life, dealing with the fact that he couldn't do things the way he used to do this. So we're talking about acquired disabilities again. And it just kind of made me realize that, it could all just disappear in the flip of a switch, and you'd have to completely readjust your life. So just kind of get out there and make the most of the time you've got, really.
Oh, that's really lovely and very inspiring. Right. Just coming back to the entrepreneur revolution, I think often people have a passion and they don't kind of know what to do with it. And I think it is a fabulous book to sort of say, here's your passion and here's business, and how can you make these two cross over? It's very inspiring. And the music and the film sound lovely. I'm going to look that film up. It sounds really interesting. I do love those.
It's well worth a watch. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Very inspiring. So my second key question to you is, for the listeners at home, if you could pass them one tip that they can start kind of implementing today, whether that's something practical or an emotional sort of thought tip, what would it be? Yeah,
for me, again, something we've spoken about a lot is that finding that real something that drives you, that really motivates you. And I found that whenever that's been lacking from either myself or when I've seen other people, that again, as I said, motivation comes and goes, and when you're on, it's great, and when it's off, not much happens. But finding that one little thing to hang on to that really inspires you, and it can take some reflection to look back and think about through your life, what are the things that kind of really got you fired up, really got you going. And it's not always that easy to uncover what it is, but take a bit of time to reflect, which is not something many of us actually do. We say we do it, but we never really do just actually take the time to have a think about, where have I been, what have I done, and what are the things that inspire me. So if you find that, then you're not going to have a problem motivating yourself, you're not going to have a problem performing. So that would be my tip, is really have a think about what drives you, what keeps you going.
Lovely. And finally, sort of the aim of the podcast obviously is to help my world peace goal. So I am hoping that, by listening to the guests, our world leaders will be taking something away from it and thinking about the way that they lead. So if you were standing in front of our world leaders now, what would you say to them?
I think what I'd love to see, and not something we often see, but you do from a few, is that kind of level of humbleness where they're willing to accept failure, or when things haven't gone to plan, that rather than trying to cover these things up, that we're learning from our experiences. Something throughout my career, I used to be, in my previous sporting career, someone who, when things weren't going well, I'd either blame people or cover it up and not deal with failures. But it's now something I embrace, and as a result, I'm constantly improving because I can see where mistakes were made, where I could be better. It's almost redefining what that word failure means, and just to sometimes be bold enough to stand up and say, you know what, I got it slightly wrong. We'll try something from a different perspective. And I think people would have a lot more respect for that. There'll always be those people who will, again, of course, stand up and criticize those who have got things wrong. But I think if you're bold enough to step up and say, we could have done this better, I think would see a lot of change for the better in that respect. So that would be my advice, I think.
I think that's a lovely message, and I absolutely fully agree with it. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that within sport and music we're very used to pushing ourselves to the point of failure, and we see that as a good thing. Then it's we've gone this far, let's kind of keep going and relearn. But you're right, and in sort of the world and politics that we see, it's almost as soon as you get something wrong, that's it, you're out, and then you've lost all of that learning. So
exactly.
I'm very passionately in agreement with you there. It's such a shame. I often think, gosh, that person's just learned the lesson, and now you're kind of kicking them out of they've just learned it. I'm sure they don't have a conversation passing on the learnings. So I think that's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I've really, it's been lovely to catch up with you, because we obviously spoke a couple of years ago.
Indeed.
Really nice to catch up with you, and the book was a fantastic read, so I fully recommend listeners to go off and read that. And I'm really excited to sort of see your business journey as well as a continued sport journey as well.
Thank you. I can't wait to see how the podcast go. I hope your other guests do as well as I hope this has gone.
Well, I certainly enjoyed listening to you, and I think it's such an inspiring story for you on both counts, because not only have you come through the sporting journey, but you're now on the sort of entrepreneurial journey as well. So there's that kind of beautiful crossover of both of them, and absolutely fascinating to listen to. So thank you so much for being my first guest, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. We'll speak soon.
Hi, I'm Mary Williams, as you know, and thank you so much for listening to the Alternative Leader podcast. I search for guests to bring you lessons and learnings that can help move you forward in your life, help you achieve the success that you want to, in whatever way that shows up for you, to help you lead powerfully, whether that's in your own life, as your parenting, your personal, or your professional, and make you the best that you can be. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and review it, and please share it with as many people as you think also want to move forward and gain success in their lives. If you want to find out more about me, go over to my website, which is www.mary-williams.com. That's www.mary, which is MARI-Williams.com, and you'll find links to all of my social media profiles there. There's also a Facebook community that you can join, and again, all the links will be on the website too. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day, and thank you so much for listening.